Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Maartje.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we have a very special episode for you because we have not one but two guests. One of them is Lisa Koolhoven. She's a Dutch historian and she runs a World War II related bike tour in Rotterdam. She's also a great storyteller. Also with us is Kristen Hayford, a political scientist and a marketing professional like me. And the reason they're here with us today is because they have a podcast called Beb Bob Collateral Damage, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts, or you can visit our website, bebbob.nl. It's a great listen, so do listen. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Maartje.
Thank you, Maartje and Sam. Great to be here.
So, the first part of our podcast today will be us talking to Lisa and Kristen, and the second part will be us all responding to a movie, because why change a winning formula, right? Since we have a lot to discuss, I suggest we get straight to it. Sam, take it away.
All right, so I'll start with the questions then. Maybe you guys could briefly explain to our audience who you are and how you met.
Yeah, so you can probably tell, maybe not, but I'm not Dutch. I'm actually American, and I moved to the Netherlands in 2021. And through the integration program for new residents, I met Lisa, who was interviewing me about my experience integrating. The integration program had some new changes, and the city wanted to know how it was going.
Well, Kristen and me, we met over coffee, and I interviewed her about her inburgering, her integration process, and soon we started talking about World War II, and we went way over time with this interview, and we discovered we share an interest.
Yeah, so you guys made a podcast together about your family members who lived through the Second World War. Can you tell us about them and how you thought their paths might have crossed?
Yeah, this idea for the podcast actually started with Kristen when she joined me on a bike tour I host about my grandmother's story, her experiences in World War II. She was in Rotterdam, a city that was heavily bombed in the Netherlands. And well, since I felt an interest with Kristen in World War II, I invited her on this bike tour. It was in Dutch. Kristen was still in the process of learning Dutch. Kristen, you might want to say yourself what happened.
Yeah, so Lisa invited me on her bike tour in Rotterdam, and I was brave and said, just do the tour in Dutch. I'll try and follow along. But as much as I could understand, I did not understand that the tour we were on was about a bombing done by the Allies, where I assumed it was a bombing from the Germans. After the tour, I still didn't clicked with me yet. I had, since Lisa did this cool tour about her grandmother and her family's history in connection to the war, I thought about my own grandfather, who was a pilot during the war, and printed out his photo in his airman gear and wanted to share it with Lisa to show, hey, yeah, I also have this connection to this world event. And it created a moment of kind of discomfort and shock when I realized, oh no, wait, it wasn't the German, it wasn't the Nazis that bombed Rotterdam. And this war was about a bombing by the Allies. And it made me immediately think, oh no, where was my grandfather during this time? Like, was he already stationed in Europe or was he still in the States?
I had no idea. I just knew he was a pilot in the European theater.
And so for me at that moment, I realized, or I had to ask myself, could my grandfather have been part of this bombing of Lisa's grandmother and the other residents of Rotterdam?
Well, the city was bombed by the Nazis in 1940, and that was the start of Second World War in the Netherlands and the occupation. And actually, it was quite well integrated of Kristen to know about that bombing because all Dutch people know about this bombing. But the bombing my grandmother experienced was of 1943, and I knew it was the Allies. But well, when Kristen showed me the picture of her grandfather, I thought it was very cute. Like she brought this picture, but at the same time, I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. Like oh, maybe it was your grandfather. And also, I was a bit embarrassed as a historian that I didn't even know whether it was the Americans or the British who done it. because I never gave them much thought, to be honest, like the pilots. I was really focused on the story on the ground and victims there and the area in Rotterdam. So it brought this whole new perspective.
Can I ask you a question? Your grandfather was a fighter pilot, right? Not a bomber himself.
Correct. He was a fighter pilot, so I knew he wouldn't have been part of the pilots who'd actually dropped the bombs. However, I knew that the fighter pilots always escorted the bombers. So even just that kind of association and yeah, I imagined he still could have been part of that mission.
Yeah, we've talked about a few movies that were about bombing during World War II. So Masters of the Air, a TV show, not a movie, but 12 O'Clock High, Memphis Belle. And then we've talked about much fewer movies that talk about the civilian impact of bombing. The movie Their Finest comes to mind, but I think some people even have a sense that a movie like that is not technically a war movie because
Mm.
you're seeing the people who are being impacted by the violence rather than the people who are dealing out the violence. And so one of the things that really fascinated me about your podcast was getting to hear from people who were materially affected by what the allies had done, for better or for worse. And so you called your podcast Collateral Damage. And I was curious from your research and the opportunities that you had to speak with people, what were the most striking things for you about the ways in which people's lives were affected on the ground?
Yeah, well, obviously, I spoke a lot with my grandmother when she was still alive. Like she passed away 10 years ago. And she was quite factual in talking about this event in her life. I guess also she encountered confusion about this bombing, like when she wanted to talk to other people about it, like, hey, what is it, 1943? That's not what we know about Rotterdam and a bombing. So I think she learned to not talk too much about it. And then I came and, well, started, I don't know, not pushing her, but we start talking a lot. For her, it was a lot about not only losing her house and everything in it, but also the network of neighbors that was really vital for survival during war because you helped each other out. You shared food and you told one another, like, oh, you can go over there. There's some loose beams in a railway track and you can take them and heat the house with it. So that's was what's stuck in my mind about like, the consequences of this. But I would like to say something about the term collateral damage. For me, it sounds like war is part of life. Like war, well, war is there. We should accept it. And then there's this collateral damage that's part of war, and we should accept it. It's like a too casual term for what it is for me.
I think, yeah, and Lisa and I were talking about this as well together. I, our hot take is maybe that this like war industry machine would crumble if we actually had human perspectives of these bombings and the collateral damage it causes, just because it wasn't until making Beb and Bob that it really clicked for me what happened to people like Beb and her family during the war and still in war, where you're displaced, you lose your community, you lose your home, access to food, water, all these things that we need for survival as like humans.
Do you have any sense of how they may have felt differently about being subjected to a quote unquote friendly bombing versus, a bombing that was coming from the Germans?
Other people we spoke to or we found quotes in other documentaries, people said like it was necessary for for the bigger goal. We're not sure whether it's a Rotterdam quote or it's a British quote, but people were like, yeah, you can't bake omelets without breaking eggs. And we heard this lady who was only a child and she lost her mom because of this bombing, but her dad didn't allow her to speak badly of the Americans. Because she had, as a child, she had a lot of anger towards the Americans. But her dad was like, no, you shouldn't talk like that. They are our liberators.
It's interesting you should say that because I have a quote from a famous Dutch historian other than Lisa. It's by Lou de Jong, and if you're Dutch, you will know who he is.
Yeah.
Even though this bombing is, I think, largely forgotten, even in the Netherlands. Like, I didn't know this bombing had happened until I listened to your podcast. But Lou de Jong did write about it in his big archive about World War II. And there's a quote in here from a Rotterdam civilian who wrote in his diary, "If this is what liberation looks like, then I don't want it." So,
Wow.
yeah, that's a pretty tough quote. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting.
There's only a small bit in his entire collection of books about this bombing, though. It's only a tiny bit, but I found it interesting that it was in there.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I would like to see it. I am interested. Yeah, what we also noticed in our research and sending our podcast off into the world, that time is very important, like how much time has passed since an event like this. So I'm not sure, yeah, as a historian, I should know when Lou de Jong wrote his masterpiece, but it was not too long after the war, I guess, because that can also be a factor here.
I had to look this up for a second because I didn't know, but these books by Lou de Jong were published from 69 and onward, and there are 12 parts, and some parts even have multiple books. So I figure that he must have started writing it during, if not right after the war, for him to be able to publish that at all on time. So yeah.
Kristen and I found also this material or this documentary with the navigator of that day, like the one who made the mistake, we might say. And he was very remorseful. Plus, we found out, like from the interviewer of that documentary, that his last wish, where he was very ill, this navigator, his last wish was to be at the revealing of the monument in 1993, and he wasn't welcome there. So even like 50 years after this event, people in the neighborhood felt like, no, this man has no place at this commemoration.
Did your grandmother express similar feelings towards them, or did you not speak about how she felt?
No, I didn't talk about the Americans so much with her. More like the bombing itself, like experiencing a bombing, whether it was done by Nazis or allies. So we didn't go much into that.
Interesting. Kristen, I have a question for you from the American side. Your grandfather was part of the 8th Air Force, and you reached out to them during your research as well. How did they speak to you about what happened?
Yeah, we approached them to kind of have a research partnership with them, getting access to their archives. And they were very interested in our project, but they were also concerned that by focusing on the collateral damage, we might paint the pilots in a bad light. I think it was when they realized that it was about my grandfather that they kind of loosened up and gave me more room to explore, knowing that, yeah, I'm not going to say something terrible about my own grandfather. But yeah, it took me a bit aback because I think, in America, we don't go into too much detail on collateral damage and the real cost of war. The story we get in our history books and how we talk about it is that, we make sacrifices to uphold democracy and freedom and liberty, and what we did during World War II, or what, our grandfathers did and our grandmothers, was like the ultimate sacrifice. And also that's very dear to us, and it's touchy. It's a very touchy subject. And I think in a way our podcast, Bob, was almost, why turn over that stone when it's already, like, you don't know what you're gonna find. And that kind of felt like the reaction I received from just the museum, but also my family. They were hesitant as well about me going deeper into the story, and if I really did find a connection to this forgotten bombing and my grandfather, what that would mean for his legacy. Obviously, we hold him very high and dear, as did go through a lot. He flew 81 missions over Europe within the span of 8 months. He was just so eager to get home, and I think a lot of the young men were. But yeah, I think approaching them also made me realize that this is a delicate subject and to handle with care. I'm really proud with what Lisa and I accomplished, and I do think we did that in a nice way that I do feel proud about. But yeah, it's delicate. It's this very delicate history and legacy, and kind of going back to uncover new perspectives and new viewpoints is not necessarily warmly welcomed, is what we learned.
No, well, I won't spoil the entire story of your podcast for our listeners. I think they should definitely also just listen for themselves to figure out what actually was the connection between Beb and Bob. I think maybe logical question to ask next is actually for you, Lisa, and I'm gonna skip a few questions and go to the last one that I wrote down because it is about how we see our liberators. And I wonder, Lisa, as a historian, I don't know if you can answer this specifically, but do you think there is room for nuance in our collective memories regarding the people that liberated us?
Yeah, I think it would be very welcome because I feel this like being a hero can also be a burden or dehumanize people. And what I learned from these pilots, like that they were so young and all the hardship they went through, and they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. And I feel nowadays, well, it's still happening. People go into war and it's so dehumanizing. Like also for the people operating bombings, whether it's operating a drone from far away or actually being on a plane or, well, I myself, I didn't think much about those people. It was like, yeah, apparently they're there for a goal. We're quite confused in nowadays, I would say, like what is the goal? What is all happening? But even looking back at our World War II liberators, I feel like making them only heroes doesn't leave room for the hardship and also the mistakes they made. And when they do make mistakes, we shouldn't judge that hard.
Mistakes do happen also, I guess, and by ignoring them, by just saying, oh, but these guys were like faultless and they can do no wrong, it
Yeah.
almost does them a little bit of a disservice too, because it erases their entire purpose for being there. Like, they're not there to be the hero, they're there to do a job, and I don't think any of them feel much like the heroes. You do hear veterans say a lot, the people who are heroes are the ones who died.
Mm.
It's interesting to me. It must be really strange to be worshipped like that as a human being, too.
Yeah, I feel maybe this is for Kristen to say, like this survivors guild was there, I guess, with Grandpa Bob.
I was actually just texting with my uncle, who's the son of Uncle Bob, and he was saying that he knew Uncle Bob or his father had hit targets on the ground where he imagined there might have been some civilians or just prisoners working on the ground. It was something he said to me that my grandpa carried with him for the rest of his life. It really bothered him that he had to do that. And I think that's a lot of soldiers in war. They have to do things they don't want to do, or it's impossible decisions that you have to make, one impossible decision or another one, and you're trying to find like which would be the better outcome when both outcomes are just terrible. And I think that the hero image just overshadows those realities and makes, I think, these men and women really lonely and isolated after they get home. At least I can imagine. But yeah.
I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on the way bombing is portrayed in media. I'm asking because we are a media podcast. So I do wonder if you've seen any of the movies or TV shows we've talked about. And has your opinion of those maybe changed since making this podcast together?
When we talked about this briefly offline too, I think, obviously the American war movie industry is massive. And so most of the war movies that people have seen are American war movies, right? Like you ask people to name, they're going to say Pearl Harbor, Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, maybe. And just the fact of the matter is that American civilians have never been substantially bombed in the way that European civilians were during World War II. And so the predominant perspective that we see in media is just completely not that side of the coin, like not the civilian side of the coin typically. So, yeah.
It took Lisa and I going up in an airplane over Rotterdam.
That really made me understand the full picture of being up there in the air and the bombs dropping on Lisa's grandmother below. It was devastating. It was completely devastating.
If you really can create something that people could comprehend that devastation, really, I think would have a different impact on how we view war.
It's such a shame that shows like Masters of the Air, which are modern and new and exciting that they don't even have to look at the collateral damage, so to say, on the ground, but they could even show you the way the pilots and the bombers felt about it, and they do a very bad job at it. They glance at it and then they don't go any deeper, and it's such a shame.
Yeah, what you see is in Germany, right? That they bombed a German city and then they're on the ground. Kristen and I watched it together, or I watched half of it because I'm too scared. That's why until our research, until making our podcast, I thought my grandmother's neighborhood was bombed by only one bomb because I never watched war movies. I had no idea about bombings. But now we learned that it was 100 bombs within 1 minute that dropped. So
Crazy.
it was a very steep learning curve. So also watching war movies is new to me and having this. So I wouldn't call myself an expert on that. I guess you're the experts. But what I recall from Masters of the Air is this German city that they walk through briefly and people are angry, right?
They are. It's just such a shame because the American movie industry has a tendency to make things very on the nose. And if they'd done that a little bit more in this show, but on the other side, on the the feeling side and showing how the pilots felt, that would have been so much better, I think. And I love Masters of the Air. I love this show. I think it's great. But just it could have been so much better.
Yeah, they did have that opportunity. There's a really good quote from the Harry Crosby memoir that they based part of the show on, where he talks about how they felt as the war progressed and they saw the damage that they were doing. And he said, "Were we machines? Had we adjusted too well to the humdrum business of winning the war?" And so, yeah, like it was something they frequently talked about with one another, how they felt about what they were doing and whether it, clashed with their ethics and morals and whether they thought they were doing the right thing when they bombed civilians and that kind of stuff. And then Masters of the Air sort of blanked. He did not face that in any meaningful way.
It's interesting. In our research, I had all these letters from my grandfather during the war. So, like, from when he enlisted after Pearl Harbor up until, yeah, he got to go home. But it was really interesting. Lisa and I both read them and, his tone. And of course, he's young. So, when he enlisted, he was around 20 years old. And if you can imagine, he was a kid who grew up during the Great Depression and did not come from means.
So for him, he was really impressed with the army and the 3 meals a day and being called sir and getting to eat off of white tablecloths after he was promoted to first lieutenant. Yeah, it was really it impressed him and he wrote home about it.
He was really like, wow, look at this. Will you believe this? And then also flying was a dream of his. Like as a kid or, as a young boy, he'd always wanted to fly airplanes. So it's like quite shocking then when you compare those letters when he's in training to the letters when he's in active duty. It's a complete shift in tone and it I think captures as well that reality of wait a minute, what did I sign up for? And I just got to make it home. Like that's the goal. Let me just make it home. In the podcast, I think it's really sweet. Lisa will be like, oh, she had it's like he's trying to protect his mother from really knowing what's happening so that she doesn't worry. I think he had to grow up really fast. And I do think he had to do things that he would later reflect on later in life and kind of wish he probably didn't have to do that.
For sure. That makes sense. We found a Danish movie about a civilian bombing, and in particular, the Allies accidentally bombing a school that they did not intend to bomb. And so there are some very similar themes in this movie to what you guys had talked about in your podcast. The movie is called, in Danish, it's The Shadow in My Eye, but if you're looking for it on Netflix, it's called The Bombardment. It came out in 2021. It was written and directed by Ole Bornedal, and it's based on the true story of Operation Carthage, during which the RAF accidentally bombed a Danish school in March of 1945. So we'll talk a little bit about the movie, and hopefully if you guys have some tie-ins from your podcasts and stuff, we can get into that too. Mart, what did you think of this movie?
I thought this movie was like 2 words for it's sad and weird, is my general impression. It felt to me like a horror movie almost, and I don't like horror movies. There was something about the music and the way it was set up, the way it was tense the entire time. I did not have a good time watching this movie. That's not to say I didn't find it interesting, I just wanted it to be over. How about you? Who wants to go next? Anyone have any thoughts?
I think maybe it also has to do with something you said before, like most war movies are from the States. And this is like a European production. It has this Danish, Scandinavian sauce, I would say, or atmosphere to it, I felt.
It was kind of interesting to see how the children were treated as adults in wartime, or at least in this movie. The main character, he's dealing with PTSD and has to continue on and almost gets like yelled at for not returning back to normal or being like a normal kid. And it just made me really sad for him. Even from our podcast, Mrs. Vapanar, who was 6 years old during this bombing on March 31st in Rotterdam, having to look after other children, but she's also a child. And you see that in this film.
Yeah, they really come up with, I guess, practical adaptations for dealing with the situation that they're in, but at the same time, it's so childish. There's like things going on around them, and then they invent the story about, the evil lady who works in the bun shop and that kind of thing. And you're like, yeah, I mean, kids also, like, they don't necessarily have the emotional tools, so they're going to use what they do have to figure out a way to, navigate this world that they're in that they don't have any control over.
Another thing that I really noticed about this movie is how it's a movie about death, obviously, but also thematically, there's a lot of death in every single scene. Like, even the lady at the bun shop, she kills people, and then the dad says something to the little girl about dying, and there's so much of it in it. The disaster itself was not enough for this movie maker.
Yeah, the pieces that I did liked, and immediately felt inevitable. It was very vivid and horrifying. And, I did get teary eyed in some parts, which doesn't always happen when movies try and make you sad. Sometimes I'm like, no, you didn't do it. You didn't hit the right emotional note. But this one did. But also, some part of me was like, yes, you're telling me the story of what happened in this bombing, but what is the goal of your storytelling? Like, what are the themes? There's some weird stuff with the nun and I was just kind of puzzled about I was what's the goal here?
Yeah, we talked about that, Kristen and I, because I thought maybe the nun and the was it ex? I forgot how
So
they called it in the Hippo.
Yeah, the fascist party, I guess, in Denmark.
Yeah, I thought, okay, now he saves her, and will they kiss and live happily ever after? And then,
Right.
so no, but no, they didn't. And then, like, what was she doing? Where was she going? Was it on purpose?
I was like, are they gonna try and force a Nazi redemption arc on us? Not sure about this.
There's like a bunch of religious imagery in this too that I don't understand. It might be because I'm an atheist and I don't get it, but also it might just be really weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get into the plot. The movie opens with a poem, and it says, I'll never forget the screams uttered when the bombs hit the site, the school dark from being shuttered, children crying out of fright.
Yeah. So now you're warmed up for a bunch of child murder. It's Jutland, Denmark, February of 1945. There's a young boy named Henry, played by Bertram Bisgard, who witnesses a friendly plane. So this is a British plane, mistakenly strafe a taxi carrying a wedding party because they think it's a German staff car. And this traumatizes him so badly that he's unable to speak for much of the film. He's frightened of going out under open skies. It has a huge, huge, huge like psychological impact on him. And he ends up being sent to live in Copenhagen with his aunt, where he will attend school with his cousin Rigmor, played by Esther Birch.
Yeah, this opening scene, I did not expect it to be that violent and bloody. It set you right up for the rest of the movie, I would say.
But yeah, when the wedding party is at home and they're all getting ready and the bride has her white dress on and everything, and then they get into the car, you're like, this cannot end well.
And it was so interesting because Well, Kristen just told me her uncle mentioning the shooting Opa Bob had to do, shooting people with his plane on the ground. And that was new information for me. And then we watched this movie right after. She told me this. And then we see actually this fighter plane shooting people on the ground with great consequences.
We should talk about the family criticism that the family of the real life pilot had about the strafing scene.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So, this movie was changed after the fact. Like, it was made, it was published, it got shown, and then the family of this pilot, Peter Klebu, got in touch with the movie makers, or maybe they just cried out to a journalist or something. But they were really unhappy with his portrayal and his name in the movie, so they changed the movie after the fact, which I don't think has ever happened before.
They changed it.
They did, yeah. I don't know what exactly they changed, but they did
Well,
change something.
in the movie, there's a brief scene. I don't know if this was filmed later or what, but there's a brief scene where there's a guy who tells them that they accidentally strafed a car full of civilians. And then one of them says something like, could have been us, or glad it wasn't us, or something.
Yeah.
So they made it so that, yes, it still happened from a friendly plane, but it wasn't this pilot in particular who did it, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, I remember that scene.
Which I guess comes back a little to how much can we portray our liberators and the people that are there to keep us safe in a manner that's not necessarily flattering to them. Like, it's an example of that directly in this movie.
Yeah, and I want to chime in because I think again, it's maybe this is back to your question about how media portrays war, but it's very black and white. And I think I can imagine, yeah, the family being concerned about, yeah, being associated and connected to this film, but it's, yeah, a broader conversation around that. Again, war makes impossible decisions and also it gives space for tragedy and mistakes and with real consequences. And I think it's important to portray the broader view and also that it's very gray. Like war isn't black and white, except that's how they kind of portray it. So it's almost a conflict to begin with. We're almost created our own conflict just by how we want to package up war to be dotting the I's and crossing the T's. It's way more complex and dark.
Yeah, there's such a like a bubble of storytelling that emerges around all of this stuff that's like very complex. And then the actual thing that happened is there was a guy who was 20 or 21 flying a plane, doing a job that requires him to kill and making a split second decision based on the information that he had, regardless of all the other stuff. Like, that's what happened that day. And it's like, yeah, it was a mistake, but the context that he was in is like, yeah, those mistakes ultimately are deadly. And a lot of them did happen. And regardless of what, people might or might not want to be associated with, it's like, yeah, it's just the given context of it is, those sometimes that's what happens in war.
Yeah, I think it's always what happens in war. If I may be so bold to make that assertion. Yeah, it's war.
If the gray stories would be out more, maybe nobody would want to join anymore.
That's true
Interesting.
too.
So we keep on telling these stories.
Yeah. All war movies are propaganda, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second major plotline features a young Danish man named Frederick, played by Alex Hogg Anderson, who has been working for the Hippo, which is the Danish auxiliary police force that works in tandem with the German Gestapo, so they're not friendly people. He senses the writing on the wall at this point, and he knows that the war is ending. And while all this is happening, he crosses paths with the young nun, Teresa, played by Fanny Bernadal, who's trying to convince herself that God exists, or doesn't, because she's kind of disillusioned with the state of the world around her. And this is the weird part, guys. This is just a really weird storyline.
This subplot was wild. She like takes his gun from him and then kisses him, and then they're in a church and he attacks her, and then she puts like blood on her hand and pretends that it's the Jesus statue bleeding. There's just so many things happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the actual benefit of this plotline was to the story, if I'm gonna be very honest.
Me either.
I would say to leave us in confusion.
Yes.
So weird.
Yeah, well, her questioning God is logic, I would say.
It's true.
And maybe that's why it's so confusing and weird because we don't like where does God fit in during war? Maybe I
Yeah.
don't know. I think they were trying to go bigger with like a bigger idea, but
I think they should have just simplified it and made it less symbolic and weird. Like if they just made her have a conversation with another nun about how she felt, that would have made sense to me. But this was just really strange.
Yeah. Bit of a swing and a miss symbolically.
And she
Yeah.
was also whipping herself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I categorized like the whipping herself and the kissing of this hippo guy. It was in the same category, I guess, like to punish herself.
Mm,
Hmm.
interesting. I don't know.
Henry makes his way to school. It's l'Institut Jeanne d'Arc, which is a French language Catholic school, each morning with his cousin Rigmor and her friend Ava, played by Ella Nielsen. And these are kind of the three child main characters. Ava has also witnessed a traumatic event. She saw the shooting of a Danish collaborator in the street. Nevertheless, the three of them do childlike things, even as they try to make sense of everything.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that we witnessed the shooting of the collaborator in a window. Like, we don't see it directly. And I feel like that's a choice. That's a specific thing to do for the director, I guess. But I don't know what they're trying to say with it. So I don't know why I'm mentioning it. It's not even that relevant if I don't have anything to say.
I almost wonder if it's like because so much of this movie is from the children's perspective, and obviously Ava is the one who is impacted by this, and it's her perspective that we're getting. By seeing it through a window, it's like kids have an understanding of of the whole situation. They understand like this much, like a little square out of it. So it's like, yeah, she's seeing this terrible thing happen, but she doesn't really have any context for it. And we understand that when she talks about it later, and she's like, yeah, I saw a guy got shot, and she's very kind of like devil may care about it. And this is a small child, she's like 5 or 6 years old. She just has no understanding of kind of the broader situation.
It's such a bold choice, by the way, to tell this story through the eyes of the children mostly. We could have told it more through the eyes of the family members, but they chose to do it through the children's eyes, and I wonder if that's for shock value as much as anything else. I don't know.
That made me cry most of the movie because it was through children's eyes.
Yeah.
My son is that age. I have a son of 7 years old.
Were you guys together when you watched this movie, by the way?
Yeah. So I let Kristen watch the bad parts. Like
oh yeah. yeah, she washed my face. It was really sad.
it was more emotional because it was through the eyes of children. And then so it becomes so clear that on the one hand, like you say, Sam, that children will play or find their way in every situation. But on the other hand, it was so painful to see how quickly they had to grow up.
So the third plotline that we follow, which will intersect tragically with all the others, features a group of RAF pilots who are being directed to bomb the Gestapo headquarters in Denmark at the request of the resistance. It's a difficult mission since the Gestapo imprison resistance members under the roof as human shields, so it's kind of a cowardly thing to do. Nevertheless, if the building is not destroyed, the Gestapo are close to crushing the Danish resistance entirely, so it's kind of a Hail Mary. It's a all or nothing situation.
Yeah, brutal. And the pilots are not very happy when they hear about this because they know that the odds are pretty high that they're going to kill some of these resistance members who are being used as human shields.
It's a chilling thought to know that the resistance invited the RAF knowing that not all of their members would survive. It's like, how many members can you lose to justify it? To save all the rest?
It made us wonder, did it happen more often? Did it happen in the Netherlands?
I actually had a look at this. Like, this wasn't the only time this happened like this. They were invited more often, except it didn't go quite as wrong, quite as often as this one. But the resistance frequently did invite the RAF specifically to come and bomb headquarters of the Gestapo. So it's not the only time. But usually the civilian cost was much lower than this one. So I guess it was an acceptable collateral damage in that case.
Yeah.
On the morning of the bombing, March 21st, 1945, Frederick has quit the Hippo and he knows he must leave town because as soon as the war is over and he's not protected by the Germans, all bets are off. His neighbors are not very happy with him. His parents are not very happy with him. Teresa has been told that she will be expelled from her order because she has started up this illicit relationship with Frederick that I totally agree, Lisa. I feel like this is like a self-sabotaging thing that she's doing. The RAF pilots, meanwhile, approach Copenhagen as the children rehearse a play at school.
This entire sequence, I felt very nervous because we know what it's about. We know what's about to happen. The way the music has been put under, specifically the flying sequences, it's so freaking tense. I was like, I don't want to watch this anymore. I just want to turn off the movie at this point. Like, let me live knowing that all these people are going to be fine. But no. A pilot, Peter Klebu, who's the one we were talking about earlier, who's played by Alban Lendorf, and his navigator, Reginald Hall, played by James Tarpey, hit the searchlight tower and they crashed near the school. They crash and create a lot of smoke, and that makes the other bombers think that that's where the building is that they're supposed to hit. And though some bombers do successfully hit the Gestapo headquarters, others mistake the burning plane for the target and unload on the school.
Yeah, and we found very recognizable that one, like with the analogical technique at the time. I don't know,
Analog, maybe?
like one followed after the other. The one plane is being hit and then it's damaged and then leaves a marker in the wrong place, and that's the others follow. And that's how it went also in Rotterdam with this mistake.
Yeah, it's if it would have happened today, we'd have had like more advanced radio communications or quicker communications. You think things might happen less, but I don't think they do in practice. Like,
Yeah, I mean, like weeks ago, a girls' school in Iran was hit by a missile. So very
yeah,
much a topical conversation. And it's kind of like, well, regardless of the intent, the result is the same, which is that, regardless of whether it was a mistake or how bad people feel about it, the experiences of the people on the ground are still like valid as well and deserve to be
Mhm.
told.
After the initial salvo, Theresa and the other nuns take Rigmore and some of the other children down to the basement. This is so scary. Unfortunately, successive waves of bombing cause the basement to collapse. There is a terrible scene of all of the parents running toward the school, which is completely in shambles and ablaze. And we kind of stay with Theresa and Rigmore for a while, but as the firefighters rush to put the fire out, the basement slowly begins to fill with water. And this scene, man, with Rigmore and Theresa, I did really like what they did, where we're focused on Theresa. We don't know what's up or what's down. We cannot properly see anything, except for her face. I thought this was a really effective scene.
Supposedly, this whole Teresa and Rigmor bit where they're buried in the basement and they can't see each other, but they're talking is from there was a documentary that was made in 1970 where one of the surviving nuns, Sister Helene, said, "We were buried in rubble and we knew we were helpless. It was strange. Suddenly I heard a voice whisper, 'Sister, do you think we're going to die?' 'Yes.' 'Do you think it'll last long?' 'I don't know. Maybe.'" And it was apparently this conversation that inspired the filmmaker. So in real life, it was not between a nun and a child. It seems more like it was between two nuns, but nevertheless, very poignant. Henry, who has escaped physically unscathed, finds himself able to speak again. As I think Lisa was saying earlier, he ends up having to grow up in about a split second because he's given the job of writing down identifying details of children that are pulled out of the rubble so that the parents can be told where their children are. And then he doesn't have the luxury of, experiencing his trauma anymore. He has to take on this task to help other people. And that's kind of really horrifying in its own right. And Frederick manages to free Teresa, but Teresa will not leave Rigmor and the basement collapses as she tries to go back for her. So they've put us through all of that and then she doesn't make it.
Unfair. There's another thing I briefly wanted to mention that I don't know some of you noticed, but when I was sending you like updates as I was watching, they made these children look like ghosts because they're covered in ash. It's such a powerful imagery, I think. I don't know if they were made to look like that on purpose or if that was actually realistic, but they looked so like ghostly, and I thought that was really interesting and also horrifying at the same time.
It reminded me of 9/11.
Yeah,
people
For
walking
sure.
away from the Twin Towers. They look the same.
Days confused, not all there.
And just the sheer fact that a child had to be the one to describe the children to the parents that were trying to find their children is kind of horrible in its own right. Like he gets his job thrust upon him by a firefighter or a policeman, I don't remember, but either one of those. And in a way I think it saves him too from his own trauma. Like it gives him something to do until he is able to speak again. But at the same time he's a literal child. Why do you entrust this job to a child?
Yeah, he had this notebook around his neck, eh? I
Yeah.
think this firefighter was very practical.
Yeah.
Okay, look over there. There's a notebook.
Didn't even think about it that way, actually. That's a good one. Like, it might have just been a practical reason.
I guess. Yeah, I thought. Yeah.
Because he would also probably recognize more of the kids than, like,
Mm,
a random adult as well.
yeah.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, but why didn't this actress couldn't do it anymore? I don't know.
Are we talking about Teresa?
No, the actress who was supposed to read out the names of the kids and stuff, and then she couldn't do it, so Henry had to do it.
Yeah, in the theater. Yeah.
She was able to kind of recognize her own boundaries and be like, "I can't do this," and then Henry, who's a child, who's having all of this downloaded onto him, he doesn't, I guess, understand that he could also set boundaries like that for
Yeah.
himself, and he's like, "Well, I've been given this task, I've been thrust into this situation, I guess I have to do it."
Henry informs Ava's mother, played by Milan Beltoft Olsen, that he thinks Ava simply went home, and we know that she did because we've seen it. We followed his mother sprinting through all the streets to get to her house and up the stairs, and there she finds her daughter unharmed, eating a bowl of porridge because earlier in the day her dad had told her that if she did not finish eating her porridge, some evil man would come and kill her. I think, was the story. So it's really morbid. Like, the only reason she's eating the porridge is because she does not want to die. Which makes me think, is this meant to be another symbolic version of the war, too? Like, it's full of symbolism, this movie.
And this is such a childlike sense of practicality. Like, my dad got mad at me this morning, and now I have to address this situation. Whereas we also saw her dad outside of the school just absolutely devastated because he's like, the last thing that I told her was that she was going to die, and he feels terrible about it. And she's just like, well, I better go home and eat my porridge, or I'll be in big trouble. My dad told me. So the film ends with a list of those killed, 87 school children and 18 adults, and the adults include 2 firemen and 2 fathers who tried to save their children, which I thought was just devastating, and a further 67 children and 35 adults were wounded.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't think you can realize without watching this movie just how devastating this bombing actually was. Like, it sounds really abstract when we're just talking about it, but I would recommend you watch this movie if you want any sense of what it would have probably been so much worse in real life. So
Well,
it's
and the
just
fact that you see all these parents running from nearby houses and stuff, it's like, well, all these kids, like nowadays it's different, right? It's like you can go to a school then and take a bus for 45 minutes or whatever. But now at that point, it's like, yeah, all these kids live in this neighborhood. Like, just imagine this little neighborhood and there's 87 dead kids. Like, that is just unimaginable.
And they did also like the choice to have Henry, this boy, have PTSD about planes and things falling on him from the sky, have him move to another city, to only then have his trauma come back to haunt him in this way is kind of cruel.
Yeah, I found that to be really a terrible, terrible twist of fate for him, where he was supposed to be safe there and ended up being right in the line of fire, friendly fire.
What a terrible lesson to learn that not only can the adults around you not keep you safe in any meaningful way, because his mom sends him to Copenhagen and then, even more weapons grade terrible shit happens to him. But it's like, not only can they not keep you safe after the bombing when they force him to do this task, it's like they're not going to keep you safe. They're also not going to like protect you emotionally. They're not going to take responsibility. It's like you will have to cope with all of that yourself, even though you are 9 years old or however old he is.
And they show you a photo of all the children in the school at the very end of the movie too, just to remind you that this is a real story and this actually did happen and it's terrible. Like, I'm glad that we watched it and we chose to add a movie to your podcast story because there aren't too many movies like these, but at the same time, it's a horrible movie. Like, the story is just so terrible to go through. I'm sorry we made you watch such a traumatizing movie.
Yeah, we did decide to watch a happy movie now because we've only been watching war stuff together. So
Balance out.
yeah, to balance out, go to.
We'll balance out.
What is the happy movie you're going to be watching?
Yeah, we're not sure yet. We did.
I'm sure. If you have any recommendations.
My movie that I put on after, like, a horror movie or something is Legally Blonde.
Nice.
It's
Yeah.
great.
We do have some additional notes.
So the Gestapo headquarters, the Shell House, was destroyed in this bombing, and they ended up freeing 18 resistance prisoners and destroying German records. This resulted in the damage of the Nazis' anti-resistance infrastructure in Denmark. So the goal of the bombing was ultimately accomplished. 55 German soldiers, 47 Danish employees of the Gestapo, and 8 prisoners died in the Shell House bombing. 9 airmen died on the Allied side, and a memorial to the airmen who were killed was erected in Denmark on the 50th anniversary, which I think is quite interesting in terms of just the sentiment of the people on the ground who were, subjected to this. Jeanne d'Arc's sister school, Institut Saint Joseph, where the surviving children were transferred after the bombing, continues to memorialize the tragedy each year. A statue of Joan of Arc that was rescued from the ruined school stands in the garden, and there's also a memorial to the bombing on the site of the original school, which is now a block of apartments.
Yeah, that is really interesting that they did make a memorial for the airmen who died, even though they inflicted such terrible shit on this town. Not on purpose, but still, like, it's a very big tragedy.
And the timing's interesting. 50th anniversary. That's the
Mhm.
same amount of time for the March 31st bombing was.
Wow.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
was also 50 years after the monument was there, and then this navigator wanted to come, but he wasn't welcome.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that in Denmark they have this monument also for the airmen.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, because the bombing of Rotterdam, this Allied bombing, like 453 civilians died. Also, 26 pilots. But it feels
Yeah.
like that is next level to talk about during. We'll be going to the commemoration next week.
Are you doing
Cool.
a speech?
Yeah.
That's neat. That's exciting.
We'll send some photos.
Yes, please do. Yeah. I guess there's a couple more things for us to include in this episode. For one, we will have to rate this movie in a bit. But before we do, I'd like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts and rate us 5 stars or send this episode to a friend. We usually say something funny here, but I don't think this is the kind of movie to be funny about. I will say that you should definitely go listen to Beb and Bob Collateral Damage on Spotify, Apple, on the website, anywhere else it's on. You can probably just Google it. It's a really interesting podcast.
Should we rate this movie Poison Buns out of 10?
Sure, we can rate this movie Poison Buns out of 10.
All right, Mart, how many Poison Buns out of 10 would you rate this movie?
I would maybe rate it 6.8 poison buns out of 10. I don't know how you would cut up those poison buns into like 0.8 pieces, but I thought it was an interesting movie. I think it's good to portray the things that go wrong in a war. I thought the drama of it and the serious parts of it were really good. I thought the children were fantastic. I just wish they hadn't included that weird nun story. I just cannot. It just completely ruined part of the movie for me, so that's why it doesn't get a higher rating than that. Who wants to go next? Anyone? Any thoughts? Any ratings?
I will give this film 6 poison buns out of 10, I guess. I don't think I would watch it again, but I think it was a movie that actually depicts collateral damage in a real way, or like in a way that you can comprehend just how terrible it is, damaging to people on the ground, especially the children. It's an important story to know, but a hard watch. And agreed that the nun symbolism and the god symbolism is a bit hard to follow. They're going for something there.
Okay, I'm gonna give it 7.2 poison buns out of 10. I'll take your point 2 of a bun and add it to my buns. Super emotionally effective. I mean, man, the scene where the mom is running to see if her daughter survived, just weeping buckets, man. But also a little thematically lost in the sauce. Wasn't sure, I think, exactly what they wanted to do beyond tell the story of this bombing, which I agree is an important story to tell, but perhaps they didn't construct that story as aptly as they could have. I also probably wouldn't watch it again, but I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad to see a movie about the civilian impact of bombing that actually goes the distance and makes you feel something. So yeah.
How about you, Lisa?
For me, it would be 7.8 poisoned buns out of 10, I would say. I wouldn't watch it again, but only also like for the acting of the children, like this boy who loses his speech. I think he was amazing, his acting, and that it portrays the situation on the ground. I thought it was interesting. It makes you think, like this nun will stick with us for a while. Like what was happening there? That's interesting. That's worth some points to me.
Yeah, when she pulled the gun out, I'm pretty sure I messaged Mark and I was like, "Why does she have a gun?"
Yeah,
The nun has a gun.
I forgot about that gun. Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps us up very nicely. Lisa and Kristen, thank you so much for being on with us and telling us all about your personal story and talking about this movie with us. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you for having us. We enjoyed being a part of it and appreciate the opportunity to hear more about Beb and Bob.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcia, Sam. It was very interesting and nice doing this together with you.
You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode to a friend. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Nailed it.